And then we've got licensing rights to play music on a...
What's it like?
Do we need like licensing rights to play?
Technically.
Dimitri from Paris has maybe not given us the ability to play the song, but we think it's an excellent song, so we'll let it rip for just a minute.
I mean, there's something about, I'm reading the sample that is not too challenging.
Yeah, plus people obviously are coming to talk about Drupal 8, not necessarily some music. Yeah. But if you just follow me on Spotify, you can see what I'm playing, and it'll be fine too. Not crazy. Alternatively, you can fly to Ibiza on June 4th and catch the Glitterbox opening. Because at the closing party, the opening party is going to be... but there isn't a DrupalCon like 2 days before, so I won't be there, sadly. Alright, so I'll talk about Drupal, it'll be good.
Alrighty, on that note, good morning everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Couch Coding Drupal 8. Your experts for today are Pantheon co-founders Matt Cheney and David Strauss. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we start. Please make sure you submit any questions you have during the session in the question window. We want to answer as many of your questions during the presentation as possible, so keep them coming. Also, this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone next week. I'd now like to turn it over to David and Matt.
Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Today is our couch coding episode on Drupal 8, which is obviously the greatest, newest, and bestest version of Drupal, if we don't count Drupal 5, which was the greatest version of Drupal. But despite earlier efforts this year for Drupal 5 to really become something special, it was sadly frustrated. Here we've got the Drupal project statistics, which I really like to watch. This is all the new sites that are being created. So we'll see we have a nice little spike since the beginning of the year, from 40,000 sites to 77,000 sites running Drupal 8. And but there was here, right in February, there was this Drupal 5 renaissance, where 25,000 sites were created just for Drupal 5. So shout out to whoever did that, or whoever people did that. But we're talking about Drupal 8 today, which is obviously the hot topic. And coming out of DrupalCon New Orleans, which was a fantastic conference, we have even more cool info to talk about and to share. This is hopefully going to be sort of interesting. So Drupal 8 is here. We hope people are trying it. To kick this off, I think one of the things I wanted to sort of start by showing folks is some sort of cool Drupal 8 stuff that I had done for the DrupalCon. Integrating with, we have this tooling at Pantheon called Quicksilver, which is part of our awesome naming kind of thing for cool products. But what Quicksilver is it's basically a way to automate your Pantheon workflow. So when you do stuff on Pantheon, it'll actually have can do other stuff. So when you do a deploy, it can run a cross-browser test, or if you do a commit, it can call you on the phone or whatever. And that's one of the things I think something we're seeing at Pantheon is really a sort of development of more mature development practices for everybody. This is something people do a lot. And I think we talked Drupal 8, making new websites, integrating new stuff like this is really cool. And so one of the things that we had done for DrupalCon is we'd obviously spun up a site with, you guessed it, Drupal 8. And we had a bunch of pictures from these bicycles that we make in San Francisco, and made this little site. So what I want to do is sort of show off the site, because I was doing some site building and I thought that was pretty awesome, but also because it highlights a couple cool features in Drupal 8 that sort of can get us talking about why it's the best release, except for Drupal 5. Just a caveat, sorry, no trouble. So this is all. This shouldn't be. So I set up this site with basically just Drupal core. That was something David and I gave a session on at DrupalCon on, was it Agile D8 builds?
Something like that.
Is that it? So we had this theory, which we talked about at the conference, which was that in this world of Drupal 8, we have a content management system in Drupal 8 that is more or less like a complete CMS. that you can download it, you can like create like relatively complex content types, and you can build sites without really using a lot of custom PHP code. And then this was sort of the talk we had given on that. We built a site for this as well, and sort of tried to like tell people, and I think this is good advice to everyone here, if you're starting a Drupal 8 so if you're starting a Drupal 7 or 6 project, typically the first thing I did was I'd like go get a bunch of modules, because I absolutely needed a bunch of modules. And then I would typically make like another custom module called like whatever site I was doing, like _library, which was just my like utility module. And I would like start to like do stuff there. Like I would do my form alters, or I'd do my hook menus, or I'd like, do other, do hook init and do whatever I wanted, because you can do some crazy stuff in hook init. And that was fine. Like that's what you need to do in some cases to make sites, but it was difficult for sort of long-term maintenance because you had all these like custom code and like you have to sort of know the modules and the hooks. And I think the good thing about Drupal 8 is that like, and I think it's a recommendation for folks who are building new Drupal 8 sites, that if you're starting with making a site in Drupal 8, you can actually just start with Drupal 8. You can download the core package, you can start, making content types, building views, setting it all up, and you, in many cases, may not even need to use custom code. Or if you do, it's like 1 or 2 contrib modules that are sort of, necessary. Or maybe it's a little code here and there, but it's sort of like an end of the project, last mile kind of thing. In many cases, not all cases, but it's something that I think, also makes your all lives easier as developers, because you just have just the core CMS code to worry about. It's like, really easy to update that, once every Wednesday when it comes out, and it sort of all basically works together. So that was something we talked about at DrupalCon. The session looks like it's been recorded, so people can check it out if you're interested. It might have been, Dave, this is the first time you presented the site building track?
I think so.
It's good. So it's like, we like, had some good energy for the site building. I do a lot of site building stuff. We talked a little bit about this Panoply distribution. We and a number of other people had done in Drupal 7, which sort of tried to do something like this, out of the box, but create a CMS. But Drupal 8 is that, so that is pretty cool. So anyway, shout out to our talk for DrupalCon. But let's go ahead and I'll show you this quick little demo, then we'll do a bunch of questions, which is like the format of this thing for sure. But one of the things that obviously is new in Drupal 8 is the block system, which is not like a new system, but like it's been like, like definitely improved a lot. So I didn't like the block system in Drupal 7. I actually turned it off often on my sites and just used panels, because panels is superior, has superior tendencies. But one of the limitations of the block system was that the blocks were limited. You could only have like one, every block got sort of like thrown on this block page, and you could only have one instance on it at any given configuration. And you also had like very difficult times taking that block, the block configuration, and putting it into code in a version controllable, testable, dry runnable kind of way.
I mean, things like features could kind of poke around into Drupal, try and extract the configuration, serialize it into PHP, reapply it elsewhere, but it was always a crapshoot.
Oh yeah, and you'd have to like use contrib modules to do that. You had a lot of crazy amount of code, and you can also do some weird stuff with context to do this as well. I didn't use a lot of that module, but Drupal 8 is better because it's all in core. That like it all's going to work the same way. It's all going to be very consistent. And so we've got like on our site we've got like these sidebar elements. Currently they're on the left, and we'll go ahead and just drop them on the right as a sort of change one might make. If you're like, oh man, I want to put the thing on the left, and then we can go back to the site and show you what we're doing. So it shouldn't like blow anyone's minds yet because it's not, that crazy. Although, woo. But the cool thing about this is that like this is the kind of change that like is very visual, right? It like legitimately changed our homepage. And it's the kind of thing that like we want to like do a lot of testing and review for as part of what we're doing as developers. So one of the things in Drupal 7, you might like do features, try to export this out and like, get all that stuff set up. But Drupal 8 has the configuration management system, which is awesome. It basically is a system that takes all the configuration elements and drops them all into YAML files, which sounds like camel, but it's really YAML with a Y. I like camels. I have this concept that my friends and I have where like if we're like working really hard, we don't necessarily have time to eat all the time, and you can just like just drink a bunch of energy drinks and get a lot of your work out. But then like you have to eat at least once a day, and so if you're like coding all day and you need to eat once a day, it's called food gambling, where you just like eat like 3 meals at once. You're like, I'm going to this high restaurant, I'm gonna get like the soup, and I'm gonna like fried noodles, and I'm gonna get like this curry, and I'm just gonna eat it all. Like a camel, because camels like drink water like once every like 2 months, and like then they just have water, and then they don't go that fast, but they like actually go quite a distance. Although it's always a pain to ride on a camel, not to diverge too much. After about 2 hours, like 3 days in the desert, it's like Anyway, so sorry. So like the YAML files are configurations, and they can go into version control.
And more than just like landing in version control, they're actually designed to look good in version control. Like one of the issues with features exporting PHP, it would number array elements, and sometimes you would remove something early in it, and then it would renumber everything, and then you'd have a huge diff as it restructured all the information. And all you had made was one tiny change, and it looked like a massive thing to review in code. And part of why Drupal 8 is using YAML is that it's great for code reviews. It's structured in a canonical way so that a tiny change looks like a tiny change in a diff. And it's a little more human-friendly as well. Like if you need to add additional lines, if you really are clever with exactly how you manage the configuration, you can just do it directly and then re-import it.
I have to cross the fingers.
Yes.
I like to have the robots do the work for me, of course, because robots will drive our cars. They should also export our configuration to code. But the robots need to be told what to do. You could hook this up to Amazon Alexa. There's some PHP Symfony integration to do so. But right now, the way to get configuration into code is you can run your favorite Drush or Drupal console command. This is the Drush version, config export. And
alias sex.
Apparently. I mean, it's a good feature for sure. It's something where, so the deal with configuration management is that like when I made the change right here, this changed it in the database. That's called like the active store. That's not in code yet. The idea is you can like play around and like do a bunch of stuff in the database, and then actually want to export it into the configuration staging directory. You actually have to run an option to do export. Sort of how features work. You could change stuff in the site, and then you'd have to export it to a feature.
And there's a reason why we're doing it that way in Drupal 8 versus the system that it was originally inspired by, which is Jenkins, which is because when you're importing certain types of configuration for, say, fields, panels, etc., it might actually affect the database schema. It might cause other side effects. We can't just simply change config in a directory, reload a page, and expect it to take effect. There has to be a sort of import process to create those side effect changes.
Yeah, and that's good. I think that actually makes sense, sort of from a development standpoint. We want to work on stuff and twiddle, and then when we're ready to go, we'll put it in, because sometimes we make some mistakes and have to like redo. If you're not someone who makes any mistakes, or you just want to have a record of all your mistakes so that you can, feel like you're improving, there is a module called configuration tools that'll actually automatically commit and get every configuration change that you make. So change field, commits and get. Change it back, commits and get. You can get a nice like log of this.
For those not afraid of commitment.
Yeah, but we're in San Francisco. Things are a little more flexible here. So anyway, you can export it with Drush, and that's something that we support on the platform using Terminus. So you can do Terminus, Drush, and the site. But there's another way you can do it. So the way you can do it in core, which is sort of like a little weird, honestly, is in Drupal core, the way you get the actual info or whatever is in the core system. You actually export and you get this tarball. So it'll make a big tarball and have you whatever, and you're run this tarball, and you run a lot of stuff. People email you these files check out this Excel sheet, check out this PDF. You don't know who they are, and you run it, and then your computer gets real slow. It's sort of weird. So we don't recommend that, but we do recommend a very excellent module called config devel, written by our dear friend Chix, right here. And config devel is basically a module. If you're like doing a lot of module development with Drupal 8, it's super helpful to check out because it'll actually export out the YAML files for like a module that might use. And with a patch that
I'm sure he'll play it the next time that he comes back from quitting Drupal.
I didn't see him at DrupalCon actually.
Yeah.
No, Chicks is fabulous. The Fountain of Code is his nickname, and we were talking on Twitter about this. And basically, I was like, hey, like, you know, Drupal core will just give you that tarball, and then you have to like upload the tarball and put it in virtual. It's sort of weird. One of the things that would be awesome is if you could just write the configuration to disk with like just a button, right? Like you don't need to download the tarball and put it in virtual or whatever. Just do a button. But at DrupalCon Barcelona, talked to Alex Pott, who's fantastic also. He's a core committer, and he's like, look, we can't have Drupal write its own code because there's some security reasons why you won't want to do that. Now, on Pantheon, you can't do that. Like, our live environments, you just can't write the code. It just won't work. But, because for security reasons. But when we talk about development environments, like dev, we have an option called SFTP mode because you, in fact, do want to change the code in dev. That's where you're going to do your, like, you know, theming and also, and, you know, PHP code, also where you can export the configuration. So, one of the great things about Drupal is you have, obviously, contrib. So, within the configuration development module, our colleague, Steve Vector, right here, created a little patch, which I added a commit message, or a Drupal set message to, is my contribution. But basically what it does is it gives you a button to actually export that configuration to disk. So,
and it was assumed from the design of config management in core that this sort of extension would happen in contrib. Tools for comparing configuration, importing it, exporting it. The real goal of putting things in the core was to have everything build off a foundation of configuration, importing, and exporting so that this enhancement could be possible, and it wouldn't be done in a janky way. It would be in a way where every single new contrib module that gets released, every single new core improvement that gets released will just be fully supported by tools like this, even as without updating these tools.
Correct. And I like this because I'm doing my configuration, you know, shockingly, in the UI. So when I'm done with that configuration, I want to export it to disk. Having something in the UI makes a lot of sense to me. So we got this patch. By the way, if you're interested in checking it out, it's Drupal issue 9704845. 2704845. But you can look in config devel to check it out, and definitely review it if you're at all interested in that. After you use it, of course. But pretty easy to use. You click button. And the button will basically export out the config, and it'll give like a red message, which is the thing I added, if it like can't do it. It's like, I can't do it. And that's probably because you have this thing set to Git mode, if that's what happens. Or if you can do it, like it did, what it actually is going to do is it's going to take that configuration, and it's going to write the YAML files out to the disk. So we'll go ahead and do a little refresh here. And you'll see two files are ready to commit. And these are .yaml.
And because it's canonically structured in the export of the YAML, you're only going to see the files change that actually need to change. So it's great for code review. You can see that we dropped the weight on sidebar, the region sidebar second to bump it up.
And moved it between the first and the second region. Like, this is so much, if you like did diffs with features, like you could get crazy diffs. Which, like, it's going to be crazy sometimes for sure, but like, this is a lot more readable. Like, someone who comes later who like looks at this commit, it's like, okay, I see what they were doing. And, you know, of course, we'll go ahead and say, you know, changing the sidebar sides. CSS, by the way, for anyone try to acronym that for us. And we'll go ahead and do that commit. And what's cool here is that like this can be a commit that also can go along with your code and other stuff. There's definitely at DrupalCon chatting with some folks about sort of best practice around this. Some people like to just have the commits for the config be separate. And some people like to have the commits be part of something else. So maybe if we had also done some theme changes along with that, we could commit as well.
One quick question that came up in regards to this portion of the demo is, so you can't use this feature in Git mode, correct?
Correct. So the feature requires that you can write to the system. So if you're, so on Pantheon, it has to be an SFTP mode to write to the file system. But if you are using Git mode and have a checkout on like your local computer, your local computer can in fact be writable, and you could export it there as well.
It's all about wherever you're changing the code is where you're going to be exporting your config.
Correct.
And another reason why you might want to actually combine the code with the configuration into one commit is sometimes you can create circular dependencies where you can create, you could have a module loaded in that provides a field that you've then added to a content type that you're then using in a view, that you're then theming that field in the view's rendering. And then now you have code for configuration for code for configuration, and it should all work properly for dry run deployments with Drupal 8, yes. Where you can put it out there, you can do your dry run, you can have all of it deployed in conjunction. Any schema updates, modules enabled, etc., is all considered part of the configuration.
Yeah, and we're big fans here of dry run, doing dry run deployments. Which, I mean, we do like champagne, so maybe a drier kind of champagne, I don't know. But the dry run deployment is basically a completely scripted, automated process where if you hit deploy, it'll go through all of the steps, all sort of as part of one process to actually do the deployment. And so you can test that using the robot. So you can click that button to do the deployment, and you can have the sort of dry run happen in, obviously, the test environment. So I'll go ahead and sort of kick this off, and we'll see some. This is where we get a lot of magic. Dry run. Because if you've noticed here on the right side, we've got a Slack channel. This isn't just like us talking about crazy stuff. This is actually using our Quicksilver integration to push like information to the channel. So we had one commit right here. It just says, hey, there's a git commit. I did a git commit to the site, which isn't like crazy. But something you might want to do. But we'll go ahead and hit this one button. That's all I clicked is one button, and that's like the normal test button on Pantheon. So it's going to pull the code from dev into test, and then it's also going to take the database and files from live and push it to test. So we have this test environment that's like basically a very good version of what the thing will look like when we deploy live. We're using our containerized environment, so the test environment is like the same versions and the same configurations of all the different PHP, MariaDB, this kind of stuff. And it'll go ahead and set it up.
We've got another quick demo-related question, and that is, does it support the Drupal core config changes only, or contrib modules too?
All contrib modules.
And that's one of the great things about configuration management is because it's a core system, it imposes its will on all of the other contrib modules. So unless you're doing something like super funky in contrib, which like obviously will happen, but is definitely not the norm, any of the changes that you make will work really well. One thing sort of to note here on the side, we had a Slack message that said doing a deployment, but then we actually have this drush operation that's running right now. And one of the things with configuration that's important is that once you actually export it to that file system in those YAML files, that's like important because you have to have it in version control. But to actually like get those set up into an actual site, you have to run a config import. And one of the things that we did on the site is using a really basic Quicksilver operation. We ran, and we have an example here. It's drush config import. Basically, we just like specify in the workflow that after a deployment, we're going to run this one PHP script, and that PHP script isn't going to do very much. It's just going to run basically this one command, drush config import -y, and that's going to clear the cache. But what that means is it's actually in our test environment going to import those sidebar changes that we had made, so we can get that kind of stuff squared away, which is really great. But that's not all. So we also have 3 other things that are running on our dry deployment. We have this cross-browser testing tool called Spotbot that's for every single commit on our site is going to, so now I'm logged in, which maybe, oh, perfect. It's actually going to go test in Firefox, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Steve Jobs' iPhone, and Google Nexus. And these might take a hot second more. But it's the kind of thing, this is Internet Explorer, where like y'all want to test like your stuff from different browsers, of course. That's sort of important. But realistically, like you may not like bust out your IE VM for like every single change, or you might not have an iPhone or whatever for every single one. But because we're doing a dry deployment, and Drupal 8 makes this really easy, we can simulate what the deployment's going to look like, by making the config change, having it do a Drush import, and then we can run a cross-browser test. We can also run a tool called Backtrack, which I may need to be logged in for this, but Backtrack is a visual regression tool where it'll actually show the visual difference on the site. In this case, the visual difference is considerable because we've moved whole items around. But if we just had a small little change where we maybe added some padding to something or removed something, it'll let us cue in really quickly on what actually is different, which is a really nice tool. Visual regression testing is definitely something to check out if you're doing front-end development work or in QA or quality control, because what we're doing is we're actually comparing the live instance of the site versus a test instance. So we can basically see just the difference in what we pushed. And then a third thing we did, which is going to be really important, and we can definitely riff on this a lot, is performance testing. Drupal 8 has performance characteristics and improvements like you wouldn't believe. That's not necessarily all you need, but it lets you make very performant sites, especially when you're using it on a platform like Pantheon. But don't take our word for it, of course. We actually, every time you do a test deploy, we're actually going to run a performance test. So we're going to run, I think it says 50 virtual users for 3 minutes. And every time we do that dry deploy, we can actually do a test as well and get that information. And that's all this stuff is we have a Quicksilver examples repository that has examples. And they'll work for stuff that's not Drupal 8 also, for sure. But the important part is that we can use additional testing tools to really sort of stress test what's possible in Drupal 8. So that when we roll out something that's enterprise grade, professional grade, or just straight up awesome, we have a lot of confidence in that. Because one of the things that Drupal 8 does, it does help us a lot with performance. It has a much better sort of cache tagging system to do invalidation. It turns on page caching by default. With Drupal 8.1, it was released in April, there's this big pipe technology that will allow the sites to work even faster. And that all these things give you a sort of up the stack kind of ability to make fast sites. But, ultimately the performance is going to come down to what kind of craziness you're doing. And having the ability to test it sort of on a regular basis is actually really important. So that's something that as part of, I think, when you're talking about, hey, I'm going to start working with Drupal 8, what kind of things do I want to change about my process? I think my number one suggestion for Drupal 8 development is start with core, see how far you can get. Don't go to contrib until you have to. And two is, I think, get really disciplined about using the configuration management system and absolutely integrate something like our Drush importers for deploying to test and live so that your process of actually deploying is entirely a dry run. And that will then allow you to do other kinds of tests like this. Because, I want to review my test site. I do want to make sure that's good. But the moment I get to my live site and I'm ready to do a deployment, I basically just want to hit this button and then deploy it to live and have basically full confidence that what live's going to do is going to be what I want. That I'm not saying necessarily don't check live after you deploy, but if you do your jobs right with setting up all of the importers and tests before, you in some cases may not need to, or you could just do it as a nice thing so you're happy with yourself as opposed to worrying it will break.
It's really easy to put the same hooks into live though if you wanted to do a post-deployment regression test, etc. You can copy the same config in to run it on almost every environment if you want to.
Okay. And that will work also for folks who are fans of multi-dev. All of this stuff you can do in multi-dev as well with your different branches.
Another quick question from the audience, and that's if a Quicksilver workflow is running and another person triggers it via a new commit, will it interrupt or finish the running workflow?
It will complete the running workflow. It goes through a queue.
Yeah, there's a queue for them. Sometimes you'll get a bunch of them. Each Quicksilver thing only does 120 seconds. Just typically enough, especially if you're using external services. Just kick off a curl request and go. But I think one of the things that's exciting for me and was exciting for me at DrupalCon was talking to people who are getting into Drupal 8, and they're like, "Hey, I'm starting Drupal 8 development, and Drupal 8's different. It looks similar on top, but underneath it has some differences." But I think it's a good moment a lot of people have to actually rethink and re-improve, honestly, their workflows for how they do development. They're going to learn a new system. Why not use some new tools, why not get it rolling with new stuff? So that's sort of the quick demo for like sort of how I've been doing and doing Drupal 8 development recently. Obviously, there's a lot more, and I think maybe we could drop over some questions and see what we don't know about this. We'll Google in front of you. It's fine. I went to library school. I know how to find information.
Alrighty. Let's see. We've got a question that just came in, and that is, how about Pantheon support for tag caching?
Part of our roadmap for the next 12 months is implementing a CDN edge for the platform, and we will be taking a fresh look at cache tagging for edge caching at that point. Internally, for things like Redis, it all depends on the support for those and those modules. In fact, right now, we're holding off on Redis for Drupal 8 because initial performance results are showing that it might actually be advantageous, or at least parity, to be using the database for the cache activity.
Which I think is actually pretty interesting. Redis is a data structure cache, so you can have big memory objects that are stored in Redis, and Redis is much faster because it sort of deals with inside of memory. But when we start talking about databases today versus when 5 years ago we started Pantheon, like database today, the code's very fast, and using especially solid-state disks makes those operations very fast. And so like the improvements Redis gave become less and less, and that's something definitely to consider as sort of you move into a Drupal 8 kind of.
I mean, at this point on those database servers, we're going through a battery-backed RAM cached RAID controller card multiplexing over 4 server-grade SSDs. It gets incredible IOPS.
And we love that. We love our IOPS for sure. In terms of the cache tags, which David talked about, just for folks who aren't familiar, basically cache tags are sort of identifying characteristics that the Drupal will generate per page. So it will say, on this page, we're using like maybe these taxonomy terms and these nodes and these user accounts. And so Drupal's smart, so if it knows that you've changed a taxonomy term that's like used on a page, that like it can then validate that page in cache, so you have to redo it. But if you haven't changed any users or taxonomy terms or nodes in the page, it can still be, it can just serve the cache page, which is really important because like a lot of Drupal like performance previously had been, well, if you need to clear the caches, you like run drush cc all, and it clears all caches, which for a small site, not a huge issue, but for a big site, like that can take down the site if you're just clearing all the caches, because then everything has to be real all at once. Having cache tags allows you to be a little more selective and only refresh and redo the stuff that you need to, which is huge.
And you can already integrate it with external CDNs at this point. If you use a tool like Fastly, they'll observe the surrogate keys, which is a header that you can send down, the cache keys that apply to a piece of content. And then out of band, through something like Fastly's API, you can actually request invalidation of all content with a certain tag.
Which is fantastic.
We do have a request for the example link for the GitHub link for Quicksilver.
Yes. So
let's just paste it into the chat.
Yeah, we'll get it in the chat. We'll paste it in the chat.
Not to organizers only.
Oh, perfect. We already know all about this.
We're gonna. I don't know if there's.
We'll make sure it's included in the email with the request.
Yeah, I'd also say if you just Google Pantheon plus Quicksilver, you can get to our docs page, and then if you're on our GitHub, we have the Quicksilver examples. But yeah, all the stuff we showed here is either in one of these formal examples, or it's in the we have like some pull requests for stuff that's being reviewed, including the most excellent call your friends every time you do a Git commit, which we were showing at DrupalCon. It was a little hokey. Even though I got like a fabulous ringtone to demo it, but it was. But this stuff's really cool, and I think one of the things Drupal 8 will make a lot of other stuff cooler. I think it's a good time to do web development for sure.
Right, we've got a general question of what kind of sites are good to build on Drupal 8?
A lot of them now. Actually, I mean, the more basic the use case, the more likely Drupal 8 core is likely to satisfy 100% of what it needs to do. But things are actually pretty mature, given that a lot of the top modules that we would sometimes wait on for, say, Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 are all part of core now. There's just not a lot to wait on.
Yeah, I would say like I'd write down sort of the sites in question, like so sort of on David's point, like if you're good with Drupal and you want to build like a small sort of brochure-aware kind of site, Drupal 8 will basically let you do all that out of the box. You've got the WYSIWYG, you've got the block system, you have views. You can do a lot with that, like in terms of entering content, displaying content. And those sites really clean use case. Another use case is that if you're big into like front-end sort of JavaScript frameworks like Angular or React, Drupal is actually a pretty good option for like, you can use Drupal as your content management system, and instead of like actually spitting out markup, it'll just spit out like JSON feeds, and you can do like a decoupled or headless Drupal approach.
Drupal 8 ships with the REST API.
And yeah, and it starts with the API, it's in core, and it'll allow you to like use like front-end stuff like Angular React, which are very cool tools. And they're really great for front-end sort of configuration and interface and design, but then you can use Drupal as your content management backend so people can edit blog posts or like add stuff or whatever, that's also a very good use case for Drupal. But if you're building, you can also build very complex sites. Like Drupal 8 in many cases was looking to try to add features to create some degree of parity between like some of these very large sort of web content management systems like Sitecore and Adobe Experience Manager, where you can build really cool, really complex stuff because Drupal under the hood lets you do like a ton of things. And a lot of that is baked in now. As we sort of go on, I think one of the things that's nice to see, it was nice to see at DrupalCon, is people talking about sort of how they had built certain kind of sites and like, here's some of the patterns that I had to use, some stuff that maybe was limited, and try to like sort of build that information out in the community. Because one of the sort of problems, I think we talked about this on our couch coding maybe a couple months ago with Drupal 8, was that the information on Drupal 8 on the internet can be a little bit inconsistent, especially stuff that was written before like November of last year. Because Drupal 8 had been out Drupal 8 had been like going development for a while. So there's straight up like published books and blog posts and tutorials that reference old versions of Drupal. So finding stuff after about November of last year should show you much more clean. And not that older stuff couldn't be good, but things could have changed in meaningful ways. And I think as we build more practices and show more case studies, we'll see more examples. But you can build a lot of different sites with Drupal 8, although there are other technologies out there on the internet too worth considering as well. But Drupal 8 can do a lot.
Okay. When will Zen be ready for Drupal 8?
All right. So Zen is a theme. So Drupal 8 is just Zenful, I feel, in terms of development, especially when you can do a dry run and make it all good. Zen, for folks who are big front-end people, is a theme for Drupal 8. And it's sort of starter theme, so you sort of like use it and you can like build sub-theme and do other stuff. And this is something I think this also applies to modules, so if anyone's sitting there and be like, I like need this module or need this theme, like when will it be ready? Drupal obviously has a page for each one, and you can start to see some information about what's going on this page. This has a lot of like just stuff about it, but the first thing I always check to see if something's available for Drupal 8 is obviously look down at the release, and you can sort of see, hey, we've got a 8.x7 alpha 11. So it's the 7th version of Zen. They changed stuff a lot, but it's the alpha 11 release.
Generally want to wait until at least 1 or 2 release candidates.
Well,
sometimes there's a perfect number.
Yeah, well, I mean, RC2 is definitely the best RC release, according to Cache Router, which is a great module for 6. I would say, like, so this is called an alpha 11. One of the things in Drupal that you'll see with Drupal 8 is that the decisions of when to call things, alphas, betas, release candidates, or releases, is very much up to the author or authors of the module or theme. There are some standards around it, but some people are more conservative about that than others.
It makes a big difference in how the security team treats something, though.
Oh yeah, if it's in alpha or beta, it doesn't get security review, even if there's like, or releases, even if there's like a ton of people using it. But if a lot of you are using it, that's a good sign. So one of the things I'll do is I'll look and see, okay, so there's an alpha 11 version, and it was last updated May 12th, which was, quite early ago. And then what you can do is there's this link called, there's 120,000 people using Zen of any sort, and you can hit view usage statistics. And then I'm really interested in the number of people who are using it for Drupal 8. In this case, we have 177 sites that are using it, which out of the 78,000 Drupal 8 sites, that's actually a very small number, but it's a lot more than 3 weeks ago when there was 37, so that's good. And that gives you a sense of sort of how widely it's used. Now, that's not necessarily a blocker. A lot of people are still new to Drupal 8 and trying to figure stuff out. So the other place I look is there's this blue little box that was added recently for Drupal 8 for projects, and it all links to an issue about its sort of Drupal 8 readiness. So there's a Drupal 8 contrib porter tracker thing, and then there's an issue for Zen. So you'll sort of see, okay, like what's going on? Here's the project. This is really important. There's this, where is the code? One of the things that absolutely has happened with Drupal 8 modules and themes is people are developing them on GitHub. And in some cases, syncing it back to Drupal, but not in all cases, all the time. So you can also, you sort of like, see if it's on GitHub or if it's on Drupal. In this case, on Drupal, so no worries. And then you can see some information about like when are people looking to do stuff, what's going on. And then this is the roadmap for Drupal 8, stuff they want to do. And then you can go look at the comments and sort of see sort of what's happening. In this case, hey, someone tried the Alpha 11, got it running, looks like, but a couple of things were here as sort of issues. And
I'm glad to see Git instructions lives on, because CVS instructions was a module I cowboy deployed to Drupal.org way back in the day. Okay. I don't think it exists anymore. But I used to get tired of going to the documentation page and filling in the little mini results of this slug for the module, this version, etc. And I was like, I just want something to tell me exactly what to copy and paste into the shell. It's great to see that living on, because it was a gigantic pain to even just get a clone of code for a project before.
Yeah, so this is panels module, which we'll talk about in a sec, 'cause I love panels.
Git makes it way easier though.
Yeah, but it's like, hey, in panels, I want to do a checkout, but I actually need to check out a specific branch. If I just check out panels.git, I'll get whatever's in master, which may or may not be what I want. You can get that info right here. But just to show another sort of example, so here's panels module, which is the best module in Drupal. And you can see in terms of Drupal 8, there's a whole thing about panels in Drupal 8 right here with some information. There's a weekly IRC meeting to talk about it. There is that blue box that has the same issue, and you'll see there's now beta 4 for panels, which of the 250,000 sites using it, we've got 2,500 using panels, which is actually a pretty good amount of.
Is it all built in the block system now?
So it leverages that kind of system, but it has some of the other kind of panel-y kind of things. Okay. It does not have the drag and drop IP yet, but that's part of the map. But I would say for people thinking about Drupal 8 modules and themes, is it ready? Go to the site, look at if there's a release, see how many people are using it, check out this issue, and then you can also check out sort of how often there was commits and what branches they were on, because you can sort of see when you hit under development view commits, you can sort of see, hey, the IP stuff is getting styled, which is great. That's something we really like. And there's various CSS problems. You can sort of see the work that's being done. In this case, there's a lot, which is great. Mm-hmm. And that's just sort of advice for everyone on Drupal 8.
Right. Next question is, if you do go out to contrib, do you have a list of your standard set of modules you are currently using most of the time?
We actually, part of our approach for DrupalCon with our site build that we kind of time-boxed and method-boxed, and in some cases, I think, for part of the development, Kala-boxed. We just want to start with core. In fact, we love the idea that core can satisfy the basic things, and that there's not a contrib module that we feel is necessary to throw onto every site out of necessity.
Yeah.
Almost every module. So if we compare against, say, Panoply, 70% of everything that Panoply added to Drupal 7 is part of core in Drupal 8 now. And that's just by, say, modules or feature lists. In terms of the most important features, if you start ranking them and weighting them, I would say upwards of 80 or 90% of the functionality that is really, truly necessary on almost every site is now part of core.
Yeah. And this was just, so the site we did for our presentation in Drupal 8 was this site called Fund Everything, where we have a little blog, we have these different projects to bring JBats to the DrupalCon, which did not happen, but we did throw an alien UFO dance party, which did happen, and we didn't create a Share Wealth's club, but this is a Kickstarter club we had made. So there's a video, It was a fabulous, fabulous video, by the way. And one of the things that we saw when we were building this was we wanted to use Drupal 8 core to like build a Kickstarter-like thing. We got a good distance the way in building, but once we got towards the end, we realized we wanted to have something to actually do these YouTube videos that wasn't just like copy and paste some iframes into your site. So we had to use like video embed or video field embed.
We're using video field, and this is one of the other big things with Drupal 8 that this sort of started in Drupal 7 but got richer in Drupal 8 is the idea that better extension points for stuff, where instead of having things just altering, say, a node's layout or the form you're editing for a node, they can provide something much more abstract, which is a field, which you can then add to the content types that you want to add to, organize where it exists in the layout for the rendering of viewing it, for editing it, whether it's hidden as a field, and none of this kind of re-implementation of that sort of control for every single module.
Yeah.
And then all of that configuration, as one might expect for Drupal 8, is all exportable for everything from the fields configuration down to what content types it's on and where it exists on those content types. So this was just one contrib module, adding a field, and then we just added it to the content type for doing a project on here.
Yeah.
And then we could make it mandatory. We could choose the video providers we wanted. It handles responsively rendering it so that it's the appropriate playable version of it for the different desktop browsers, for different mobile devices, and includes validation for it as well as seeing the kind of preview so that if you don't autoplay, that you can actually see kind of a snapshot of what the video looks like.
And that's a big win for Drupal 8. Is the field system is really great. You can extend it really easily, and that you adding fields to like add different stuff to your content, big win. The only other module we used on our site was we needed to do like a payment thing. So we had a payment currency.
So no, it is payment field.
Payment field, another field, which created the ability to buy stuff, and then that depended on currency to install. So actually we needed 3.
So we could charge $1 for every day in the White House.
He was assassinated prior to being in the White House, by the way. He did write a book about what he would do.
It was speculative.
Yeah, but one thing I think maybe David we could touch on was like one of the problems we ran into was that we installed the module for payment field that wanted currency, and then it wanted us to do Composer.
Yep. Which I don't want to go into all the details here, but there are a whole bunch of different approaches that are out there for Composer these days. We went with one of the most basic ones, which is just having the code cloned to a desktop, telling Composer to add the dependencies that were necessary for the module, which put them into composer.json for the project, and then pushing that back up so that it would have the Composer dependencies. And you can take a bit of a trial and error approach with it where until the right dependencies are in place, the modules that require them typically won't install. So it's hard to get it wrong and then not notice. And then run into, say, a function or class not being defined. It's more that it's not that well defined how to do it as in terms of updating core while maintaining the dependencies for modules. There is Composer Manager, but even the maintainer of Composer Manager doesn't think it's really the right approach going forward. So I don't really want to plug it too much. But
I'll bring it up just because,
it works.
This is something, if you're doing Drupal 8 development and you're not familiar with Composer, it's definitely something to spend like a half hour, an hour actually researching. Because what Composer does is, especially with Drupal 8.1, is it actually is like a Drush makefile, if you're familiar with that for Drupal 7, basically a set of instructions of like the external code that needs to be brought in to actually make your project. And that includes Drupal, that includes, like there's like some currency stuff that we needed for currency module. And it's something that keeps stuff up to date and is actually a really positive tool in the larger PHP ecosystem. But to do really nice stuff in Drupal, you end up, you'll go down this path and sort of need this kind of thing. And so checking out sort of how Composer works and playing around some builds and stuff like that is totally worth your time and something that will be an important part of the Drupal 8 world.
Quick follow-up to what we just went over, and that's what's the name of the module again that handles the video embed?
It's called video. I think it's called Video Embed Field or something like that. That's not the formal name. I would just search for, say, Drupal Video Field.
Drupal Video Field. Yeah, we looked at a few of them for it. I mean, it totally worked for us. There may be others.
This one was great because it ships with support for YouTube and Vimeo, and then has support for all these other ones as options. And then when you configure the field, you can choose which ones you want to allow. So you can go from anything, you can go all the way from allowing basically any type of major video service to have video dropped into the field, all the way to only supporting, say, YouTube. It just works great. Like, it was zero hassle.
Also, and this is like so big for freaking content management systems, is that because Drupal 8 ships with a WYSIWYG that works in a consistent way for all Drupal 8 sites, something like video embedded field can like integrate that pretty cleanly with the WYSIWYG. So when you have this module, you have this field, you can actually add videos to your WYSIWYG, which like in Drupal 7 was like not really possible because you could be running CK editor, you could be doing TinyMC, you could have different versions of those things. Like they could be implemented using WYSIWYG API, or it could be implemented using the module. And those all created weird situations where you couldn't get as tightly coupled with your solutions. And so something like this using WYSIWYG is good. So shout out to that. That's the deal.
Composer follow-up. Should we use Composer instead of Drush to install modules?
Well, there are two different schools of thought on this. There is the sort of Drupal, almost kind of transitional approach, which is use Composer where necessary, use traditional Drupal techniques for everything else, where you sort of download core, you have it running at the root of your web root. You install modules by sort of downloading them, extracting them, committing them. You can vendor them if you want to, but basically the idea is the traditional Drupal approach. Yeah. And then you would use Drush to do that, to add those modules. And I would say that a lot of Drupal 8 site builds are being done in that traditional or transitional way. The other approach is very composer-centric. Right now, there is a service, a third-party service that mirrors every single Drupal.org module into making it available as a composer repository. And then there's a beta version on Drupal.org that basically provides the same thing as part of Drupal's own infrastructure. And the idea here is that rather than the transitional approach of pulling in Composer dependencies with Composer and managing core and modules the traditional way, you can pull in all of Drupal and all of your contrib modules using Composer. And the way that you would do this sort of thing on, say, Pantheon is we've been working with some folks on a separate doc route, but it hasn't been fully released yet. But the idea is that you could do, you can put dependency specifications at the root of the Git repository, pull in all the other dependencies, and manage a project in the completely native Composer way. And the advantage there is that all dependencies and all things are managed with one system. The disadvantage is that it's going to be a little unfamiliar to a lot of people used to Drupal. Yeah. But the way that we've also seen it, including for the transitional approach on Pantheon, is that some organizations have set up their own repository at the abstract level on, say, GitHub, and then they have a webhook that runs something like CircleCI that then actually does the build, that pulls in all the dependencies, and then they push to Pantheon's Git as what's called an artifact repository, which means the materialized version of the project with all the dependencies, all the vendor information pulled in, gets committed and then deployed. And then you can still take advantage of all the multi-dev tools, all the dry run deployments, all the kind of triggered testing that you can get on Pantheon without having to manually materialize things.
Yeah. So I mean, so to answer the question, sort of around that, like, I would try to use Composer for a project, in the future relatively soon. I think it's an important part of Drupal's ecosystem. Your mods might vary. If you're just using a bunch of modules, using Drush is like not crazy. That actually makes a lot of sense. But this is the packagist thing for Drupal. So if you want to include Drupal modules with Composer, this is the way to do it.
I feel like Drupal 9 is probably going to be this way. Like
Drupal 9 and like most PHP projects in the larger ecosystem will be like this, which will be awesome.
All right, we have a few more minutes. We're going to go over and take a couple more questions. To jump around, the question is, what are the potential security risks of having the site config be public, aside from the usual don't commit API keys?
For one, we we take pains on Pantheon in terms of managing private directories to not make the site config public. We don't recommend doing that. It's good from a defense in depth perspective to not make your configuration public. Drupal's own core takes a couple steps where what it tries to do is export to a directory that is named in a way that sort of has a key in the directory name that wouldn't be guessable, and then htaccess files to deny directory listing so you wouldn't be able to discover it. And so that would be a good solution off of Pantheon, especially if you're using Apache. And then that way Drupal core, kind of in its default configuration, tries to protect config from being readable. On Pantheon, we prefer a much more predictably named directory that's locked down. But that all said, let's say someone gets access to the configuration. In general, as long as there aren't keys in there, you're fine. And we provide tools on the platform through our partnership with Locker, where you can make sure that you never commit your keys to your code, or even have to put them in the database. And basically what Locker does is it uses the public key infrastructure and certificates we deploy at Pantheon to access an audited key management system that only pulls the keys down right before they're being used and then doesn't store them at all.
Yeah. So like that's one of the things that defense in depth is important, is because like having you want to have your configuration protected, just because like people don't need to see it, so let's like not let them see it. But then if for some reason that didn't happen or whatever, having an additional layer of security is really important. The more layers you have, the more secure you typically are.
The reason why it's important for defense in depth is that there's certain exploits that might only be possible under certain configurations, or by knowing part of the configuration, it can help you refine and target the exploit to a site. So it just makes the process easier for attackers if they can know all the configuration.
Yeah. But yeah, best practice: keep it secret, keep it hidden, keep it safe.
Right. What timelines do you all expect for Drupal 8 cache tags plus Varnish and Solar? Those two features would be huge for everyone, but especially the bigger sites.
We actually answered it for the Edge earlier, for things like CDNs, where you can get it now by working with your own CDN account. And then we have things in the pipeline here to be rebuilding Pantheon's Edge on top of a CDN in the coming 12 months. As for Solar, it's a bit more complicated of an answer because Solar is very different from a cache. You don't just invalidate things in Solar and have it re-index things. You actually have to push new index items to overwrite the ones that were indexed before.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of Drupal internally tracking the tagging and what's been indexed with those tags into Solar through the search API or similar things, and then choosing to batch re-index the things that need to be.
Yeah, in terms of getting it working on Pantheon, so you're going to need like the actually Drupal module. Apache Solar module has been deprecated in favor of Search API, and the Drunken Monkey has been working on this module. So there is in fact a Drupal.
Well, not recently, apparently.
6 hours ago.
Oh, sorry, I saw it 5 years ago.
Because his name is Drunken Monkey doesn't mean he's not on this thing.
Okay.
And there's the Alpha 14 version as well as probably some dev stuff earlier. In order to get it working on Pantheon, you also will need, Pantheon has a Pantheon Apache Solar module, or Pantheon Solar module that we have that will need to be updated. It's not a crazy amount of work to do, but that's something that we're sort of working on. There's no immediate timeline for it. But,
I would imagine we're waiting on API stability with the Drupal 8 release of Search API.
Yeah, we have like an open source team here that has that on their sort of plate to work on. But it's something that Solar is pretty cool, and people will probably, because Drupal 8 does so much more content modeling, Search will be even more important.
Right, I'm going to take 2 more questions. Next one is, Drupal 7 views used to be kind of slow, and some people started to use the entity queries instead of creating views. Do you think this is still relevant in Drupal 8?
Probably.
Yeah.
The views is great in terms of, I would always start with it, for example, to prototype things. And often the prototype can become what you actually run if the view runs fast enough. If it's not fast enough, there are actually a ton of caching options for views that you can enable that aren't necessarily on by default.
Yeah.
And then it offers a couple different levels of caching, which are there's an abstract level of caching where it sort of gets the data before it sends it to the theme layer. And then that way, if the view is rendered 5 or 6 different ways, that can really accelerate the results. There's also a more concrete level of caching where it can actually cache the rendered output for the views, which is useful where, say, you have authenticated users going to the view, so you can't cache the full page, but the view itself and that content can be. And those can be great tools for that. But the entity query APIs in Drupal are still the closest way to get sort of toward the middle in terms of defining the query and structuring it without having to go full-on SQL or the query builder. So it's still probably the right tool for major sites if they're seeing performance issues with views.
Yeah, views used sort of in general ways is going to be totally fine, but one of the things when you do complicated relationships and like craziness, like you can get a little bit wild.
Another technique is, and this is a bit hard of a sell for Drupal 8 at this point, given that the Search API Solr integration hasn't really fully matured yet, but Solr, when things get indexed, get all pulled together into these entities that are much easier to index across fields than they are in the database that Drupal's using. So especially if you wanted to, say, filter by this field and sort by this field and then maybe rank by this other field in some sort of weighted fashion, Solr is a much better answer for that, especially if fuzzy results are okay, where you don't need a completely precise listing. Like you wouldn't want to use Solr for, say, listing the items in someone's cart for checkout in an e-commerce store. That would be a little too fuzzy. But in terms of finding similar content, listing content on the site, rendering kind of content on the front page to show the latest items or the popular items, Solr is great for that.
Yeah, Solar Power ran Portugal for like 3 days last week entirely, so I feel it's all happening.
Right. What is the best approach to sync the file systems, i.e. local to dev and or vice versa?
Is this for content?
They didn't go into it
Okay,
anymore.
I'm gonna assume it's for content because for
It says
code,
yes.
for code, it's Git. For content, there are a few options. One is you can work on the server and use something like multi-dev or the dev environment and the workflow tools.
We have this database files option, which we renamed recently because it was called workflow before, which was like sort of confusing. And you can just like hit clone and then pick your I want the
source environment,
live files to come down and do some craziness,
Yep.
and it'll just do that for you. If you're working on like your own like local version, that's sort of how you set it up. But you can get the files using SFTP, and you can get the database using.
We also document the right way to structure rsync to talk to it.
Oh yeah.
Where if you wanted to do that to it,
you can use rsync to do it as well.
And then yet another method is if you go to the backups tab on there. If you mostly just want to pull down a snapshot, you can either download your backups, or you can even create a backup. And depending on the amount of files, it could either be really quick or take a while. But often it's a great practice not only for the integrity of the live site, but also for development. To, if you don't mind, let me hopping over to live here, configuring backups to have a schedule where you basically choose, say, a weekly one, assuming that's enough of an interval for you. And then that means that you're going to have a downloadable copy of the files and even database for development purposes that's available very frequently.
Which is obviously very helpful for your development.
Yeah, and then we archive it onto S3 for you and retain them for the appropriate amount of time. So there's always a fresh version, and no one actually has to wait on that building out.
We'll squeeze a couple more in here. And that is, if we want to customize server settings like setting up reverse proxy, does Pantheon Dashboard have any options?
Well, we always run a reverse proxy, which is varnish to cache the content.
Yeah. All sites, all the time,
Yep.
No exceptions.
Yes. And if you wanted to add an additional reverse proxy in front, I would consult the CDN instructions for our documentation, because you can add an additional layer in front of Pantheon. You can set Pantheon as the origin, and then you can put whatever rules you want into the CDN. And basically, you don't even have to set a real domain on Pantheon to use it as a CDN origin. You can basically use something like live-mysite.pantheonsite.io, and then that can be the origin for CDN, and then every time the CDN is missing a page or needs to fetch a copy of content, it'll go right back there. Some of the biggest sites in Pantheon use a CDN in front of Pantheon, because then they get the local points of presence.
And yeah, we're big fans. We'll be talking about a lot of this later this year, because we think CDN should be used probably for most sites, just for awesomeness.
And we'll end it on, where can I find a complete list slash description of new D8 features?
I think that's really a Drupal question, in the sense of like maybe on Drupal.org.
Well, first off, you should definitely check out David and my webinar where we popped some champagne for the Drupal 8 release last November, I think. Where we
that is on our resources page.
On our resources page.
I mean, like off the top of my head, it's much more flexibility by using tools like the Symfony framework for routing requests and providing extensibility, so you can actually build modular extensibility at a much lower level than you could in previous releases without doing weird things. It's integrated with Composer. There's the configuration management system. Panels, at least the important parts of it, are basically in core through the block system. Views is very deeply in core and deeply integrated with things, the entity and field systems. There are far more fields in core now. There's the Twig template system, which is designed in a way that's much more secure by default. There's WYSIWYG in core. That's like just the beginning of the list.
Yeah, Drupal.org/8.
Yeah.
Will give you this page, which actually has you can learn about the different toolings and admin features, editor features, development, multilingual, and other kind of stuff. And each of these will jump off to other pages that will explain a lot of stuff. So this is a good place to start with your Drupal 8 love. But other than that, thank you so much for coming in and walking us jam on this kind of stuff. We're definitely interested in feedback or other questions people have on the email, and we'll be doing more of these things as we sort of get people excited about talking about Drupal 8 and all the wonderful things you can do on the internet.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a great week.